My name is Amin Azam, and I'm on faculty at two campuses of the University of California. And in this video, I'd like to talk to you about whether using problem-based learning extensively actually works. This video represents one of a series of videos about problem-based learning and is actually the fifth of the 6 videos. In the fourth video, I shared how PBL is used at the UC Berkeley-UCSF Joint Medical Program and shared that it was done to the exclusion of lectures. And I propose to you that indeed when students are in charge of their own education without lectures, they can actually cover everything they're supposed to.
This may all sound too good to be true. Really, students are in the driver's seat and they cover everything? Impossible. So I'd like to propose to you that if an entirely PBL-based curriculum is truly an iterative process, then if we use our Berkeley example model here, and let's just use this red box to represent a time in the curriculum when students elected to learn about the abnormal processes of the cardiovascular system. This might look like this for a cohort of students where they chose to learn it however many red boxes that adds up to over the 3-year journey. But of course, this is just one cohort of medical students. So if this is a different cohort, the subsequent cohort of students, their curricular picture in which they chose to learn about the abnormal processes of the cardiovascular system might look something like this. And here's a third cohort, and their cohort might look something like this. And you can see what I've done here is there is some overlap across the 3 students' cohorts, but it's not 100% concordant. So there's some cases where all 3 cohorts of students chose to learning about abnormal processes of the cardiovascular system. There's other cases where only one of the 3 curricular students or cohorts decided to learn about it. So in this hypothetical example, there's some overlap. Of course, this is all hypothetical, and so it begs the question, in an entirely PBL curriculum, number one, do students actually truly cover everything they're supposed to cover in the first 2 years of medical school? Number two, how reproducible is that coverage across cohorts of students? And just as interesting, how does one even measure that when the whole enterprise is student-driven? So I'd like to propose to you that one way to actually measure that would be to use a big national exam that all students are required to pass before going on to the clerkship years of medical school, and that is the United States Medical Licensing Exam, Step 1 exam. For those of you that are not familiar with it, the USMLE does produce an outline of what they're going to test students on, and they divide the content of the exam into these 12 broad categories. And I call this their Step 1 content schema, or categorization scheme. What they do actually, if you drill down on this a little bit, is they actually have a system in which they subdivide each of these broad categories into normal processes, abnormal, principles of therapeutics, and then this long explanation of the 4th subcategory. And this division is consistent across the different category. So for example, the code number 4.2 would be the abnormal processes of the skin and related connective tissue diseases. And similarly, 3.3 would be the central and peripheral nervous system principles of therapeutics. I think you understand that pretty straightforward. If you look further, drill down even further, this actually gets into higher levels of subgroups. So you can see these are different types of abnormal processes for the musculoskeletal system. I'd like to call these red ones level 1 codes, and these blue ones we'll call level 2 codes, purple are level 3. In reality, if you actually add up the number of levels, there's actually a total of 5 levels. And if you added up the total number of codes that existed in each level, you'd see here, for example, in level 1 there's obviously 12 codes because I've shown you all of them here. And at the level 2 analysis there are a total of 60 codes. At level 3 there's a total of 235. Level 4 has more than 600 codes. And as I said, there's some areas in this hierarchy that actually go up to level 5. But I'm just going to simplify it and show you up to level 4. So I asked you earlier, how are we going to measure an entirely PBL-based curriculum? I hope I've given you an example of one way that one might consider measuring that, which is to say you're going to take the learning objects that student created for themselves and for their peers, and you're going to code them according to the USMLE Step 1 core categorization scheme. And so that's actually something that we did at Berkeley. We took all the learning objects that the students created and we wanted to code them according to that scheme. What we did, just to put it into perspective, there are about 6 to 8 learning objects per group per case, 2 groups of students for 77 cases, so that adds up to about 1,000 learning objects per cohort of medical students as they pass through the entire 3-year curricular journey. So what we did was take those around 1,000 learning objects per cohort and we coded them. Basically what we used was knowledgeable coders who are familiar with the USMLE schema. In our case, we actually used graduates of our program, so that way they were very familiar with both the concepts of the learning objects as well as the USMLE Step 1 exam. Each learning object was tagged with up to 4 USMLE codes, depending upon how broad a topic the students elected to create. Furthermore, the codes were only as specific or as deep as the learning object itself. So if it was a superficial coverage of a topic, then the code did not drill down to the higher order level of coding. And lastly, we confirmed that the intercoder reliability was high so that we weren't worried that individual student coders were using the coding schema differently from one another. So I showed you this earlier as a hypothetical example, and now I'd like to answer the question of how one even measures it. Let's try using the USMLE Step 1 core coding schema, but now I'd like to specifically answer the questions 1 and 2. Okay, I want to talk you through this slide before I actually show you all the data. Okay, so remember that this is at the level 2 analysis, and at that level there is a denominator of 60 topics or codes in the USMLE coding schema. Now, we added up how many times each cohort of students elected to pursue these topics across their 1,000 learning objects or so. We just artificially binned it into these buckets, 1 to 4 times, 5 to 10, 11 to 19, and more than 20 times. One could have binned it any one number of ways. We could have done 5 buckets, 8 buckets, it doesn't really matter. We just chose to do it in these 4 buckets. And of course there's going to be a question about whether there were times when students never covered a topic, and so I've got that bucket down there at the bottom as well. So remember the denominator is 60. So for the class of 2006, of the 60 core content codes in the USMLE Step 1 exam, that cohort of students covered 3 of those 60 topics 1 to 4 times each. Of the 60 core content topics, the class of 06 covered 8 of them 5 to 10 times each. They covered 10 of the 60 topics 11 to 19 times each, and they covered a whopping 37 of the 60 topics more than 20 times each. So that's class of 06. Here's the same data for the class of 07, and here's the same data for the class of 2008. So what you'll see is that on average, student cohorts cover more than half of what they're supposed to cover in the first 2 years of med school, more than 20 times each, when it's an entirely PBL-based curriculum. Here are the nevers. So the class of 06 missed 2 of the 60 topics, the class of 07 missed 1, the class of 08 missed 1. So again, on average, only about 1 of the 60 topics is not covered when the entire curriculum is problem-based learning. Here's that data depicted in a graph, and at the x-axis you'll see are all those USMLE codes. And so it goes from code number 1 all the way out to code number 12 on the far right. And so here are the 3 different cohorts of students mapped pictorially. And so what you can see is that there is a remarkable consistency in the number of learning objects created by each cohort. If you look at the little salmon cohort, the 2007 cohort, you can see that the peaks are a little bit lower overall, so they chose to pursue fewer learning objects than their near peers in the class above and below them, but they still had the same pattern of what they chose to cover across the core content domains. Okay, that was a level 2 analysis, so let's drill down a little deeper and look at the level 3 analysis. So I'll remind you here that at this level the denominator is 235. So here's the data for the class of 2006, here's the data for 07, here's the data for 08. A couple things worth noticing here, even when you look at it on average. So students are still covering the majority of topics that they should be covering multiple times, so to say more than 10 times each. But there are more gaps in what the students are covering down at the bottom there, and they're as one might expect, because this level of analysis is a deeper, higher level, so therefore students might not get drilled down to that level of detail as frequently as they might for more superficial topics, for example. But I would offer, if you look at those that bottom row there, the nevers, two points I would make in regards to this. First is to say, are those 32 and 36 and 31 topics the same topics that were never covered across the 3 cohorts? If yes, then by all means those are gaps in a curriculum that are worth fixing. But then I would offer actually an even more interesting or more sort of provocative question. Show me any medical school curriculum in which all 235 topics are always addressed in any medical school. Because I just don't think that any medical school that is still 4 years in duration can truly cover all the same things. And remember, we're talking about covered as in what students chose to learn, rather than covered as in what teachers claim to have taught. So I'd like to propose to you then that indeed, students do cover everything when they're in the driver's seat. Furthermore, that coverage is reproducible across cohorts of students. So I would propose to you that an entirely PBL-based curriculum for the pre-clerkship years definitely works.
This data represents slides that I've shared at the Ottawa Conference on Clinical Competence in the past. If you want more information, more access to the more detailed analysis, you're welcome to email me at either of those emails on this slide. Again, this video represents one of 6 in a series of videos, and if you like this one, watch the others.